pretty sad.
It never ceases to completely decimate me. It's
Right.
Oh yes. I think Godard started to get this very matter-of-factual type of terse approach from Bresson, and then takes the sociology from the book, the source material, and then adds this greater kind of philosophical dimension of it that's also, very characteristic in Godard. And so the mix of all these things is completely devastating.
Right, but despite the fact that it's sociological and there's the long philosophical discussion, it's still incredibly romantically tragic, or whatever, And nobody blends it that way except for Godard, And
Can you think of other examples that are so fatalistically romantic in that way? Because I think he drifts off into this more abstract.
We did see Contempt, Le Mépris, yesterday, which is also really sad, and it's the story of the end of a love affair, and then in the end, of course, everybody dies. But it's funny. I mean, even in Le Mépris, which is the story of a woman that starts to hate her lover because she thinks he's not being true to himself. I mean, there are no easy outs, because the husband is fooling around with somebody else on the set too the whole time. He doesn't take his own tragedy seriously, Whereas here, I think she does take her own tragedy completely seriously. It's funny, we talked a lot about Godard's use of music, because pretty soon after this he stopped submitting himself to movie music, He doesn't use music the way most directors do to enhance the emotion or direct the emotion. And here he uses real movie music, but I don't know if it was because of the conversation yesterday, but I already felt that he kind of despised this music. He used it, but not exactly ironically, but, in a way that questions its meaning,
Sure, right from the get-go with the credit sequence, right? With that kind of those interruptions.
And even though it isn't so radical in the use of sound, there are a few moments where he stops, he inserts these silences, and there's this distancing always, like she's that cafe where she sits in front of a picture of Paris or something, instead of.
It's in Breathless, we're in the Champs-Élysées. In Vivre sa vie, we're seeing a facsimile of the Champs-Élysées.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She's just so affecting, you know what I mean? And she was so young. And of course we know that they had a very tortured relationship. Anna Karina and Godard must have been really great for a couple of months because the aftermath went on for a long time. But they had a terrible relationship. He was very abusive. He would leave her and I'm sure beat her or whatever. I don't know if he actually beat her, but mistreat her. And then, of course, Godard has a long-standing relationship with fascination with prostitution, you know. So many of his films, you know, and he does.
So the legend goes that he was actually very, very fond of them. Truffaut was openly so and wrote about it, you know, frequenting brothels, and Godard was never so forthright about it.
Well, maybe because of Godard's family.
Yeah.
Because Godard was from a rich Protestant Swiss family, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, prostitution, of course, is a terrible thing for most prostitutes, you know, and it's interesting to see these movies too today because our attitudes have changed. you know. And then when we think about Godard, there's something romantic about prostitution because there's a kind of identification between artists and prostitutes, and artists feel like we are prostitutes, that we have to sell our sacred gift to make a living, and there's this kind of confusion about what that means, you know, and every artist has to work it out for themselves, how that works, you know. But
and then there's just the vulnerability of insecure men who have to seek this kind of easy gratification.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it looks now, you know. But, you know, it's so complicated because if you think back to, often it wasn't necessarily about that, you know, in many societies, and it's just very...
But I look at a movie like Masculin Féminin, and I think the attitudes there are very backwards.
Right.
And I look at this film, and I don't find that at all about it.
No, I feel a lot of compassion.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? And you know, another trope, another thing that Godard repeats is this kind of silent movie fetish of fast choreography. Like maybe in the foreground there'll be something tragic going on, but there'll be like some kids playing or people running around in the background, or almost like a joke taking place in the background. And here, he does that where she's looking for another prostitute to satisfy her client, and she knocks on all the doors. And it's so weird because it's like, it's kind of comic, and it's also like an excuse for him to show all these women with their clothes off. And it's also, you know, sociological, in that it shows that you know, the day-to-dayness, the dailiness, you know, the normality. This is normal life, you know, and so
even the end is kind of a gag, right? The sort of back and forth between the pimps, and just to end like that, and that's the ultimate kind of example, I think, of what you're talking about.
Right. I don't think he can really control his irony, you know what I mean, or because it's kind of it's a bitterness or something that he feels is very honest, and he can't control it. You know, it keeps happening.
I mean, speaking of silent cinema and his fascination, well, specifically, I think he's fascinated with a figure like Dreyer, who of course is referenced very, you know, explicitly in this with The Passion of Joan of Arc. But the modernity of Dreyer's frames and the way that in The Passion of Joan of Arc, you know, the use of close-ups, I think is probably the guiding aesthetic example of this film. But watching that scene again, I found something very interesting between Carina and Falconetti, which is Falconetti is somebody who came from theater, and the relationship that Dreyer had with her was a very kind of serious one of the director and the thespian, whereas Godard plucked Carina from a commercial. But what kind of commercial was it?
Soap commercial.
Soap commercial, right? A Greek soap commercial.
Apparently, she was in the She was in the tub blowing bubbles, and you know, apparently, he got terribly excited, and he went out and found her.
I mean, that kind of tells you something right there. You know, if Falconetti, the very serious thespian who only made one movie because you know and Carina, who was plucked from the sexy soap commercial, right? Yeah,
exactly.
but sort of emulating Falconetti, right?
Yeah, I mean, I must say that, you know, most directors, when they reference another movie, they have like a TV on in the background, or somebody goes into the theater and sees a little bit of a scene. But Godard shows this long scene, you know, and it's so serious. You know, and you kind of went like, well, I left my husband, I left our child, I don't really know what I want to do, I'm only 22, death. You know what I mean? It's kind of hardcore. And of course, Arto is incredibly beautiful. Yeah. And it's like, she is not beautiful, Falconetti. She, at least at this moment, she's destroyed, and they film her in close-up. You can see the pores on her face. She doesn't look...
The snot coming out of her nose.
The snot coming out of her nose. Doesn't snot come out of somebody else's nose? No. The snot is intense. Yeah. And, but then but then Arto looks like David Bowie or something. Do you know what I mean? He's very beautiful.
First example in Godard of like the stunt philosopher casting, I believe. I don't think it happens before.
Was that a real philosopher?
Unless you count Jean-Pierre Melville in Breathless, but he's not really a philosopher.
No.
Yeah, it's Brice Perrin. He was a
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that guy is a philosopher.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that becomes like a trend in Godard of the philosopher cameo.
Right.
Well, Godard has this famous provocation where he says that he only kind of picks up books in his shelf and he reads like a page or two, like he doesn't read complete books. And I feel like it's the same kind of incompleteness, or like cast a philosopher, have him say a few things and kind of leave it at that. I don't know if it's more more profound than that, Yeah.
I think that Godard is so I mean, if that's true, he's so sensitive to anything he reads that, I mean, reading is such a strong experience, a devastating experience or whatever, that he can only read a few pages at a time. But that sounds hokey to me. It does not sound like the truth, but maybe it is. We were also talking about narrative, how he never really tells a story, how there may be a story that's there in the source material and the script or something, but he's not very, he kind of goes scene by scene and then he explores each scene and then he moves on, which of course in this film, it's so episodic,
It's, in a way, this movie kind of, I think maybe Dave Kerr observed this thing that that Vivre sa vie almost feels like a comic book more than a novel, just kind of,
Right.
these kind of frames that you observe and they keep going sideways, Yeah.
Yeah, but back to the philosophy, I don't know, I mean, I think I always thought that he kind of wanted to examine something from various angles, like as a narrative and as images and as philosophy, you know what I mean? And obviously you were saying sociology. But I don't know, do you have an idea about that? No, that's why you asked. Any other questions?
But you figure out very quickly with Godard that that's the wrong way to read him, right? To try to find meaning in those specific kind of things, right? He's a guy who's fascinated with riddles, and he is a riddle himself. If you ever see him talk, and especially his interview personality, as the years go on, it becomes more terse and enigmatic. And I don't know. There's no right way to read Godard. There's no right interpretation. There's no clue that leads to one thing, except, in my opinion, with Histoire du Cinéma, where it is kind of there are readings that you could say, or
he is making a point.
Yeah, he is making a point, but
point
it's more. Yeah, it's but not in the, let's say, the fictions. In the essays, you can see the didactic purpose of certain parallelisms or contrasts, but I think in the fictions it's harder to kind of read those. But of course, as Godard evolves, then the essay films and the fictions sort of kind of start to blur. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't know.
Thank you.